My sister Catherine was buried 40 years ago. I know this for a fact because I was the one who identified her body. I was the one who signed the death certificate. And I was the one who shoveled the first pile of damp earth onto her casket, while the rain turned the cemetery mud into a slick, black mess. But last Tuesday, at 2 o'clock in the morning, my landline rang. When I picked up the receiver, a voice I have not heard since the Reagan administration whispered, "David, it is me. It is Tommy. I just figured out who I am." The problem is Tommy is not a name. It is a file number. And the person on the other end of the line was supposed to be dead. Before I continue this story, I need to know something. Do you believe the dead can speak, or do you believe that the living are capable of evil so deep it mimics the supernatural? Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever felt a chill down your spine that you couldn't explain, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is David Harrison, and what I am about to tell you might just be the most terrifying thing that has ever happened in the state of Georgia. I am 73 years old. At my age, the world shrinks. It becomes a series of small routines designed to keep the chaos at bay. My wife Martha passed 5 years ago, leaving me in this 4-bedroom colonial house that feels more like a museum of memories than a home. I spend my days reading, tending to a garden my knees can barely handle, and trying to forget the things I saw during my 30 years as a fraud investigator for the National Insurance Bureau. I have seen people fake their own deaths for money. I have seen parents sell their children. I thought I had seen the bottom of the barrel of human depravity. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday. The digital clock on my nightstand burned with a red glare. 2:03 a.m. The silence of the house was shattered by the shrill mechanical ring of the landline downstairs. Nobody calls a landline anymore, not unless it is a telemarketer or an emergency, or a scammer. I groaned, my joints popping as I sat up. The air in the room was stale, smelling of old paper and the menthol rub I use for my arthritis. I reached for my glasses, my heart already hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up the extension on the bedside table. I did not speak. That is an old habit from my days tracking insurance fraud. Never give them your voice first. Let them speak. Let them make the mistake. For 10 seconds, there was only static. It wasn't the clean silence of a modern digital disconnection. It was the crackle and hiss of a copper wire connection, a sound from a bygone era. "Hello?" I finally grunted, my voice rough from sleep and disuse. "David." The voice was barely a whisper. It sounded dry, like dead leaves scraping across concrete. But the cadence, the way the pitch lifted at the end of my name, it sent a shockwave of ice water through my veins that had nothing to do with the drafty window. "Who is this?" I demanded, gripping the phone tighter. "It is 2 in the morning. David, it is Tommy." I frowned. I do not know a Tommy. I never have. My mind immediately went to the scams I used to investigate. The grandparent scam. Someone calling, pretending to be a relative in trouble, begging for money. "Look, buddy," as I snarled, my patience evaporating. "I do not have a grandson named Tommy. If you are looking for money, you called the wrong ex-cop. I have a caller ID and a loaded .38 special in this drawer." Hang up. I went to slam the phone down, but the next words froze my hand in midair. "I am not a grandson, David. I am your sister. I just remembered. My name is not Tommy. It is Catherine. And I am so cold." My breath caught in my throat. The room suddenly felt very small. My eyes darted to the framed photograph on the dresser. It is the only picture I keep out. Black and white. 1981. Me in a cheap suit that was too tight in the shoulders, standing over a closed casket. Catherine had died in a car fire. The police said the vehicle had gone off the bridge and ignited on impact. By the time they pulled her out, dental records were useless. I identified her by the silver locket she always wore, the locket that was fused to what was left of her neck. "You are sick," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and horror. "You are a sick, twisted individual. My sister is dead. She has been dead for 40 years. Hush, little baby, don't say a word." The voice on the phone started singing. It wasn't a recording. I could hear the wet intake of breath between the notes. It was a lullaby. But it wasn't right. "Papa's gonna buy you a hummingbird." I stopped breathing. The receiver shook in my hand. Everyone knows the song says mockingbird. But Catherine was obsessed with the ruby-throated hummingbirds that visited our mother's feeder. She always changed the lyric. Always. Just for me. No one else knew that. That was not in any obituary. That was not in any police report. That was a secret buried in the soil of 1981. "Who are you?" I screamed into the phone, losing all composure. "How do you know that?" "They call me Tommy here, David. Code 404. Please, come get me. The doctor is coming with the needle." Then a sharp click. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the dial tone buzzing like an angry hornet in my ear. I was sweating cold, clammy sweat that soaked through my pajamas. Was I losing my mind? Mark, my son, had been telling me lately that I was getting forgetful. He mentioned the early stages of dementia. Was this it? Was I hallucinating a voice from the grave? I hung up and immediately picked the receiver back up. My fingers, thick and calloused, fumbled as I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It wasn't the police. It was a direct line to a contact I still had at the regional telecom office. A woman who owed me her career after I cleared her name in an embezzlement investigation. It rang twice. "Operations, Sarah speaking." "Sarah, it is David Harrison." "David, it is the middle of the night. Is everything okay?" "No." "Sarah, I need a trace. Immediately." The last incoming call to my landline. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "David, you know I can't do that without a warrant. It is illegal." "Do it, Sarah," I roared, startling myself. "Please, it is life or death. Someone just called claiming to be my dead sister." Okay, hold on." The seconds stretched into hours. I could hear the clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick. I stared at the photo of Catherine, her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. I buried her. I saw the body. Well, I saw the body bag. I saw the locket. David, Sarah's voice came back, but it was different now. Confused, hesitant. "I am here." "Who was it?" "Was it a burner phone? A spoofed number?" "No, David. I don't understand this." "What? Just tell me the call originated from a hardline, a physical copper connection. But the location, the registry shows it is coming from the west wing of the St. Jude Psychiatric Institute." I felt the blood drain from my face. St. Jude. "That is impossible." "I know," Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. "St. Jude burned down 5 years ago, David. The state abandoned the property. The lines were cut. The grids were pulled. There is no electricity there. There is no service there." "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I am looking at the geotag right now, David. It is coming from inside the ruins, specifically from the basement level, room 404. But David, nobody has been inside that building in half a decade. It is a ghost town." I hung up the phone slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out right there. Room 404. Code 404. "Tommy." I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I wasn't senile. I wasn't crazy. Someone or something had called me from the basement of a burned-out asylum to sing my sister's lullaby. I did not go back to sleep. I couldn't. I pulled my old leather suitcase from under the bed, the one I used for my investigations. Inside, nestled in the velvet lining, was my snub-nosed .38 revolver and my portable tape recorder. My son Mark is the sheriff of this town. If I called him now, he would have me committed. He would say I was hallucinating. He would put me in a home. No. This was something I had to do alone. I put on my coat. I grabbed my car keys. My sister died 40 years ago. But tonight, I am going to dig up a grave. Because if Catherine is in that asylum, then who the hell did I bury in 1981? If you want to know what I found when I opened that casket, you need to keep listening. Because the truth isn't just scary. It is evil. I did not wait for the sun to rise. Daylight is for the innocent, and after that phone call, I knew innocence was a luxury I could no longer afford. My house was silent, but the silence felt heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I moved through the hallway with the practiced quiet of a man who spent 30 years sneaking up on people who did not want to be found. I went straight to the guest bedroom closet, the one with the false back panel I had installed in '95. My fingers found the hidden latch, and with a soft click, the panel swung open. Inside sat my old leather attaché case. It smelled of stale tobacco and gun oil, the perfume of my former life. I dragged it out, the weight of it comforting in a way that terrified me. I popped the brass latches. There it was, my snub-nosed .38 special, cold steel, heavy. It had not been fired in a decade, but I kept it clean. Beside it lay my dictaphone, a heavy brick of a tape recorder that used microcassettes. I checked the battery. Good. I checked the cylinder of the revolver. Loaded. I slipped the gun into the pocket of my trench coat and the recorder into my shirt pocket. I was not David the retired widower anymore. I was David the investigator, and I had a case. I left the house without turning on a single light. My old Buick started with a low rumble that sounded too loud in the empty neighborhood. I backed out of the driveway, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. Nobody followed me. At least not yet. But you do not survive 3 decades in insurance fraud investigation without developing a permanent itch between your shoulder blades. I took the long way to the highway, circling the block, twice checking every parked car for a silhouette, every shadow for a movement. Paranoia, my son Mark calls it. Survival, I call it. The drive to the old St. Jude Psychiatric Institute took 40 minutes. The facility sat on a hill overlooking the marshlands, a rotting tooth in the mouth of the county. It had been shut down after the fire 5 years ago, a massive blaze that the official reports said was caused by faulty wiring. I never believed it then, and I certainly did not believe it now. As the silhouette of the asylum rose against the moonlit sky, I felt a familiar tightening in my gut. The place looked like a fortress of misery, its blackened windows staring down at me like empty eye sockets. I killed the headlights a mile out. I drove the rest of the way by the light of the moon tires crunching softly on the gravel access road. I pulled the car into a cluster of overgrown weeping willows near the perimeter fence. I sat there for a moment listening. Crickets. Wind in the dead leaves. The distant hoot of an owl. No engines. No footsteps. I stepped out, the cool night air biting at my exposed skin. My knee throbbed, a reminder of a slip-and-fall scammer who had taken a baseball bat to my leg in '89, but I ignored it. Pain is just information. The main gate was chained, a heavy padlock rusting in the humidity. I didn't bother with it. I knew from the old topographical maps that the drainage ditch on the west side ran under the fence. It was tight, and it was muddy, but it was open. I slid down the embankment, the mud soaking into my trousers, and shimmied under the chain link. I stood up on the other side inside the grounds of the damned. The west wing was where the call had come from. Room 404, the basement. I moved toward the blackened shell of the building, keeping to the shadows. The smell of wet ash and rot grew stronger with every step. I pulled a small penlight from my pocket, gripping it between my teeth as I navigated the debris. Broken glass crunched under my boots, sounding like gunshots in the quiet. I found the service entrance door hanging off its hinges. I slipped inside. The air here was cold or stagnant. It tasted of mold and old fear. I swept the light across the lobby. Peeling paint hung in strips like dead skin. A wheelchair lay overturned in the center of the room, one wheel missing. I moved past it, heading for the stairwell. Down. Into the belly of the beast. The basement hallway was flooded with an inch of murky water. I splashed through it, counting the doors. Storage, laundry, morgue, maintenance. And then at the end of the hall, a solitary alcove. The payphone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I approached it slowly, my hand hovering near the revolver in my pocket. It was a standard-issue public phone, the kind made of stainless steel and hard plastic, battered and scarred by years of patient abuse. It was covered in a thick layer of gray dust. Spiderwebs connected the handset to the coin slot. I shone my light on the wall. The phone line cord had been severed, cleanly cut. The copper wires poked out like severed nerves. There was no way this phone could work. Physically, electrically, it was dead. It was a piece of junk on a wall in a ruined building. But I had to know. I reached out my hand, trembling slightly, and lifted the receiver. I almost dropped it. It was warm. Not room temperature. Not cold like the steel casing. It was warm like organic warmth. Like someone had been holding it against their ear just seconds before I arrived. The warmth of a living body. I felt the blood drain from my face. I brought the receiver to my nose and inhaled. Jasmine. It was faint, buried under the stench of mildew and smoke, but it was there. Unmistakable. Sweet. Floral. My knees nearly buckled. Jasmine was Catherine's scent. She wore a cheap perfume from the drugstore, Jasmine Dreams. She wore it every day of her life. She was wearing it the day I identified her body. I remember the smell of jasmine mixing with the smell of burnt gasoline. It was a scent that had haunted my nightmares for 40 years. And it was here. On this dead phone. In this dead building. I am not crazy, I whispered to the empty darkness. I am not crazy. She was here. I ran my thumb over the keypad. It was clean. The dust had been wiped away from the buttons, specifically the numbers. Someone had dialed out. But how do you dial out on a cut line? I was about to pull out my knife to pry open the casing when a sudden wash of blue light flooded the hallway. It blinded me, reflecting off the wet floor and the peeling tiles. A siren chirped. Short, sharp, authoritative. I spun around my hand, instinctively going for the gun, but I stopped myself. I shielded my eyes against the glare. A silhouette stood at the top of the basement stairs, backlit by the flashing lights of a patrol car parked right outside the service entrance. I hadn't heard it approach. I was losing my touch. Dad. The voice echoed down the concrete corridor. It wasn't the voice of a monster. It was the voice of disappointment. I lowered my hand. The figure descended the stairs, heavy boots splashing in the standing water. It was Mark, my son. He was in his full sheriff's uniform, his badge gleaming in the harsh light of his flashlight. He didn't have his gun drawn, but his hand was resting on his belt, a posture of relaxed readiness that I had taught him myself 20 years ago. Mark. I rasped my voice, sounding thin and old in the vast emptiness. What are you doing here? He stopped 5 feet away from me. He looked at the muddy water around my shoes. He looked at the dust on my coat. He looked at the dead payphone behind me. Then he looked me in the eyes. There was no concern in his face, no fear for his father's safety. There was only a cold, clinical exhaustion. I tracked your phone, Dad, he said, his voice flat. You wandered off again. I didn't wander off, I snapped. pointing a shaking finger at the phone. I got a call. From this phone. From Catherine. Mark, she is alive. The phone is warm. Smell it. Just smell it. Mark didn't move. He didn't step forward to check the phone. He didn't even look at it. He kept his eyes fixed on me, his expression softening into that condescending pity that cuts deeper than any insult. "Dad, look around you," he said softly, gesturing to the ruins. "The wires are cut. The power has been off since the fire. Nobody called you." "But it is warm," I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "I am telling you, someone was just here." Mark sighed, a long, weary sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. He shook it. It rattled. "You missed your evening dose, didn't you?" he asked. "Dr. Evans warned us about this. The paranoia, the auditory hallucinations. It is starting to progress, Dad." I stared at the bottle. It was my heart medication, or at least that is what they told me it was. "I am not hallucinating," I said, backing away until my back hit the cold wall. "I recorded it. I have it on tape." I reached for the recorder in my pocket, but Mark stepped forward faster than a man his size should move. He gently but firmly caught my wrist. His grip was like iron. "Let's get you home, Dad," he said. "We can listen to your tapes in the morning. Right now you are trespassing on state property and you are soaking wet. I don't want to have to put you in the back of the cruiser like a suspect." He pulled me toward the stairs. I tried to resist to pull back toward the phone, toward the proof, but I was 73 and he was 45 and in his prime. He led me away from the only clue I had, treating me like a confused child. But as he turned me around, I saw something he didn't. Or maybe he did, and he ignored it. On the back of Mark's uniform belt, tucked next to his handcuffs, was a small coil of copper wire, freshly cut. And on his hands, beneath the smell of gun oil and leather, was the faint, lingering scent of jasmine. I let him lead me up the stairs. I let him think I was broken. But as we walked out into the night, my hand brushed against my pocket. I still had the recorder, and I still had the gun. Mark thought he was taking a senile old man home. He didn't realize he was escorting the only witness to a crime 40 years in the making. And the investigation had just begun. The fluorescent lights inside the sheriff's station hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz that seemed to drill directly into my temples. I sat on a hard wooden chair in my son's office, my hands resting on my knees to hide the fact that they were shaking. Not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage that I had not felt since my days working undercover. Mark sat across from me behind his large mahogany desk. The desk was cluttered with files, a half-empty cup of cold coffee, and a framed photo of him and me fishing when he was 12. He looked at the photo, then at me, and let out a long, heavy sigh that was meant to convey patience, but only signaled condescension. "Dad, we need to stop this charade," Mark said, his voice dropping to that soft, practiced tone he used for victims of violent crimes. He slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. I did not want to touch it, but I forced myself to open it. The header read, "St. Joseph's Hospital, Neurology Department, Patient David Harrison, Diagnosis early onset, vascular dementia with paranoid delusions." I stared at the words. The letters seemed to swim before my eyes. I looked up at him. "I have never been to St. Joseph's for a head scan, Mark," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "I go to Dr. Albright for my heart. That is it." Mark shook his head, a look of profound sadness washing over his face. "You do go, Dad. You just don't remember. That is part of the disease. Dr. Evans sent this over 2 weeks ago. We didn't want to upset you until it became necessary. Tonight, it became necessary." He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "You broke into a condemned building. You were shouting at a broken telephone. You waved a gun at a police officer. If you were anyone else, you would be in a holding cell right now. But because you are my father, and because I know you are sick, you are here. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was a narrative, a carefully constructed cage designed to strip me of my credibility. I heard her, Mark 1 whispered, leaning in. I heard Catherine. She sang the song. The hummingbird song. Mark closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Okay, you want proof. Let's look at the proof. He turned to his computer monitor and typed in a password. The screen glowed blue. I pulled the call logs from the telecom server tower, he said, pointing at the jagged waveforms on the screen. This is the master record for the entire county grid. Nothing gets deleted here. This is the call from 2:03 a.m. to your landline. He clicked play. The speakers on his desk crackled. I heard my own voice, tinny and distant. Who is this? It is 2 a.m. Then silence. Just static. Then my voice again, sounding frantic, terrified. I do not have a grandson named Tommy. Hang up. More silence. Then me screaming. Who are you? How do you know that? And finally the sound of the receiver slamming down. Mark paused the recording. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Dad, you were talking to yourself. There was no one on the other line. The line was dead. The silence you hear, that is reality. The voice you heard, that was in your head. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. It was a perfect forgery, or perhaps a perfect erasure. I knew enough about digital forensics to know that audio could be scrubbed, tracks could be silenced. But to do it that fast, to have it ready by the time I walked into this office, that required access. That required power. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. I saw the tension in his jaw, the way his left index finger tapped rhythmically against the edge of the desk. He only did that when he was bluffing. He did it when he was a teenager trying to lie about where he had been Friday night. He was doing it now. My gut twisted. He was lying. But if I pushed him now, if I accused him of doctoring evidence, he would have me committed tonight. I would be sedated, locked away in a facility, and the truth about Catherine would die with me. I had to play the game. I had to become the old man he wanted me to be. I let my shoulders slump. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes, letting a tremor enter my hand. I let out a broken, pathetic sound. God, I whispered, keeping my head down. It felt so real, Mark. It felt so real. I saw his posture relax instantly. The predator, sensing the prey, had given up. I know, Dad, he said, his voice thick with relief. I know it feels real. That is what makes this disease so cruel. But we are going to get you help. I promise. He stood up and walked around the desk, placing a hand on my shoulder. I squeezed his hand, repulsed by the contact, but maintaining the act. I am thirsty, Mark, I croaked. My throat is so dry. I will get you some water, he said gently. Stay right here. Just breathe. He walked out of the office, leaving the door slightly ajar. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway toward the break room. The moment he was gone, I straightened up. The tremor in my hand vanished. The confusion in my eyes hardened into focus. I had maybe 60 seconds. I scanned the desk. Files on zoning laws, budget reports, personnel complaints. Nothing unusual. I looked at the trash can. Empty. I looked at the computer screen, but it was password locked again. Then my eyes landed on a stack of papers tucked underneath the blotter on the far right corner of the desk. It was partially hidden, as if shoved there in a hurry when I arrived. I reached over my heart, hammering against my ribs, and slid the stack out just an inch. It was a financial invoice. The letterhead was embossed with a silver caduceus symbol. Thorne Medical Group. I knew that name. Lawrence Thorne. the biggest healthcare provider in the state, and an old friend of the family. I used my fingernail to lift the cover page. The document underneath was a transaction record. The sum was staggering. $50,000. Deposited into an offshore account under a shell company name. But it was the memo line that made my blood freeze in my veins. Project TOMMY. Final payment. TOMMY. It was written in all caps with periods between the letters. It wasn't a name. It was an acronym. I heard the squeak of a floorboard outside. Mark was coming back. I shoved the papers back under the blotter exactly as they had been. I sat back in the chair, slumped forward, and buried my face in my hands, just as the door pushed open. "Here you go, Dad," Mark said, placing a paper cup of water on the desk. I looked up at him, taking the cup with both hands. I looked at the face of the boy I had raised. The boy I had taught to fish, to ride a bike, to tell the truth. And I realized I was looking at a stranger who was taking money to keep a 40-year-old secret buried. A stranger who was gaslighting his own father to protect a monster. "Thank you, son," I said, taking a sip. The water tasted like ash. I realized then that I was truly alone. The police were not my allies. My family was not my fortress. I was an old man with a revolver in his pocket and a recording in his coat that proved everyone wrong. I stood up, using my cane to feign more weakness than I felt. "Take me home, Mark. I am tired. I just want to sleep." Mark smiled. It was the smile of a man who thinks he has won. "That is the best idea you have had all night, Dad." He didn't know that sleep was the last thing on my mind. He didn't know that as soon as he dropped me off, I wasn't going to bed. I was going to war. And I knew exactly where to start. If TOMMY was a project, then someone had to have the blueprints. And I knew just the woman who could find them. I did not go home to sleep. Sleep is for the innocent, and I had just realized that innocence was the first casualty of this war. Instead, I drove my Buick down to the Bottoms, a stretch of marshland, where the streetlights had been shot out years ago, and the police only patrolled in pairs. I was looking for a man named Silas, though everyone who knew him called him Old Rat. 20 years ago, I had caught Silas digging up Civil War graves to sell the buttons and belt buckles to pawn shops. I could have sent him to prison for a decade. Instead, I saw a desperate man feeding a sick wife, and I cut a deal. I kept his freedom, he gave me his loyalty. Tonight I was calling in that debt. Silas lived in a rusted Airstream trailer that smelled of wet dog and tobacco. When I knocked, he opened the door with a shotgun in his hand, but lowered it when he saw my face. He looked older, his skin like crumpled parchment, but his eyes were still sharp. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I put $500 on his table and told him I needed a shovel and a strong back. He didn't ask who we were killing. He just grabbed his gear. That is the thing about men like Silas. They understand that at a certain point, morality is just a luxury the poor cannot afford. Willow Creek Cemetery sits on a hill overlooking the river, a sprawling city of the dead that I had visited every Sunday for 4 decades. But tonight, in the pouring rain, it looked like a battlefield. The storm had turned the ground into a slick black soup. Thunder rumbled low in the distance, masking the sound of our boots as we scaled the wrought iron fence. My bad knee screamed in protest, a sharp, biting pain with every step, but I swallowed it down. Pain was just a reminder that I was still alive, unlike the empty lie I was about to expose. We made our way to the older section, plotting our course by memory and the flash of lightning. Plot number 82, Catherine Harrison, beloved sister and daughter. The headstone was gray granite, modest but dignified, just like she had been, or just like I thought she had been. Standing there looking down at the wet grass, I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the exertion. This was desecration. This was a crime against God and the state. But the voice on the telephone the hummingbird song, it would not leave my head. Silas looked at me, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He spat into the mud and drove the spade into the earth. The sound was wet and heavy. Schloop. I grabbed the second shovel and joined him. We worked in a rhythm born of necessity, throwing wet clumps of clay over our shoulders. The rain intensified, cold needles stinging my face, mixing with the sweat and tears I didn't realize I was crying. With every foot of dirt we removed, my mind drifted back to 1981. I was 33 years old, then young and stupid. I remembered the antiseptic smell of the county morgue, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights that made everyone look green. The coroner, a man named Dr. Finch, who always smelled of peppermint schnapps, had pulled back the sheet. I remembered looking away. The body was unrecognizable. It was just charred meat and bone twisted by heat that had melted the dashboard of her Ford Pinto. There was no face, no fingerprints, just a body found in a car registered to Catherine Harrison. Finch had handed me a plastic bag. Inside was a silver locket, blackened by soot but intact. I had given her that locket for her 25th birthday. It had a picture of our parents inside. I clutched that bag and nodded. That was it. That was the identification. I didn't ask for dental records. I didn't ask for DNA, which wasn't even an option back then. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to grieve. I let my grief blind me. I let a piece of jewelry convince me that my sister was dead, while the monster who did this probably stood in the shadows and laughed. My shovel hit something hard, a hollow thud that echoed through the wet earth. We stopped. Silas looked at me, his chest heaving. We were 6 feet down. The top of the mahogany casket was scraped and muddy, but it was there. The wood had held up surprisingly well, preserved by the expensive seal I had paid extra for. I had wanted her to be safe. I had wanted her to be warm. Open it, I commanded, my voice cracking. Silas jumped down into the hole. He used a crowbar to pry at the brass latches. They were rusted shut, fused by time and dampness. He grunted, putting his entire weight into the leverage. I stood on the edge of the grave, shining my flashlight down. The beam shook in my hand. This was the moment. If there was a skeleton in there, I was a senile old man who had disturbed his sister's rest. I would go to the police station, turn myself in, and accept the dementia diagnosis. I prayed to see bones. I prayed to be crazy. With a screech of tearing metal, the lid gave way. Silas pushed it up, the heavy wood groaning as it fell back against the wall of dirt. I leaned forward, the flashlight beam cutting through the rain. I stopped breathing. The world stopped turning. There was no skeleton. There was no skull. There was no rot of human flesh. The coffin was filled with sandbags. Industrial-grade sandbags, the kind used for flood control, stacked neatly to mimic the weight of a human body. They had rotted over time, spilling coarse yellow sand across the white satin lining. But that wasn't what made me scream inside. Resting on top of the sandbags, right where the head should have been, was a doll. It was an antique porcelain doll, wearing a dress that looked disturbingly like the one Catherine had worn to her prom. But the face. The face of the doll had been smashed in. A jagged hole where the eyes and nose should have been, leaving only a painted, mocking smile. Silas looked up at me, his face pale even in the darkness. "Mr. David," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What is this? Who does this?" I stared at the smashed doll. It wasn't just a fake burial. It was a message. A message left 40 years ago for anyone brave enough or crazy enough to dig. It was a symbol of total erasure. They didn't just kill her identity. They replaced it with a faceless toy. My sister was not in this ground. She never had been. The woman on the phone was real. The files on Mark's desk were real. Catherine was alive, trapped in a concrete hell, and I had spent 40 years mourning a box of sand. I dropped to my knees in the mud, a primal roar of rage building in my throat. The rain washed over me, baptizing me in a new, terrible truth. I wasn't an investigator anymore. I was an executioner, and I was going to find the men who did this. Suddenly a twig snapped in the darkness behind us. Silas spun around, raising his shovel. I killed the flashlight, plunging us into total blackness. "Run," I whispered. But before we could move, a pair of headlights blinded us from the service road. Not a police car, a black SUV, and then the unmistakable sound of a slide racking on a suppressed pistol. They had been watching. They had been waiting for me to find the truth so they could bury me with it. The light blinded us before the sound even registered. It was a high-intensity halogen floodlight, the kind mounted on tactical vehicles, cutting through the rain and turning the graveyard into a stage of blinding white exposure. I threw my arm up instinctively, but Silas was not fast enough. The crack of the rifle was swallowed by the thunder, but the impact was unmistakable. It sounded like a butcher slamming a slab of wet meat onto a cutting board. Silas spun around, his shovel flying from his grip, a spray of crimson mist erupting from his left shoulder. He hit the mud hard, groaning, his good hand clutching the wound where the dark blood was already pooling, mixing with the yellow sand from the empty grave. "Run!" I screamed, my voice tearing at my throat. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I grabbed the back of Silas's coat and hauled him up. He was dead weight shock already setting in, but adrenaline is a powerful drug. It can make a 73-year-old man feel 30 again, at least for a few minutes. Bullets chewed up the earth around our feet, sending geysers of mud into the air. They weren't trying to scare us. They were trying to erase us, just like they had erased my sister. We scrambled over the low stone wall at the edge of the cemetery, tumbling into the dense tree line of the Willow Creek thicket. This wasn't just a forest to me. 40 years ago, before my knees gave out and my heart grew heavy, I hunted deer in these woods. I knew every ravine, every drop-off, and every root system. The men chasing us were young, fast, and armed to the teeth, but they were strangers here. They saw obstacles. I saw escape routes. "Keep moving, Silas," I hissed, wrapping his arm around my neck. The pain in my bad knee was a white-hot poker stabbing me with every step, but I fed on it. I let the pain fuel the rage. We slid down a muddy embankment, crashing through briars that tore at my face and clothes. Behind us, I could hear shouting. Professional, clipped commands. "Spread out. Flank them. No witnesses." They were confident. They thought they were hunting scared old men. They didn't know they were hunting a man who had nothing left to lose. I dragged Silas into a hollow beneath the roots of a massive overturned oak tree, pushing him deep into the shadows. "Stay here," I whispered, pressing my hand over his mouth to stifle his whimpers. "Apply pressure. Do not make a sound." I didn't stay with him. That is the first rule of evasion. You don't hide with the bait. You become the predator. I moved away from the tree, circling back up the slope, flattening myself against the wet earth behind a cluster of ferns. I pulled the .38 from my pocket. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. The rain slicked the grip, but I held it tight. A beam of light sliced through the darkness below. One of them had followed our slide marks. He was big, wearing tactical gear that cost more than my car, moving with the arrogance of superior firepower. He swept his rifle barrel back and forth, scanning the hollow. He was heading straight for Silas. I waited. I counted the beats of my heart. 1, 2, 3. When he stepped onto the patch of loose shale I knew was there, the ground gave way. He stumbled, his arms flailing to regain balance. I didn't shoot. A gunshot would give away my position to the others. Instead, I lunged. I brought the heavy butt of my revolver down on the back of his neck with every ounce of strength I had left. It was a desperate, ugly blow. He crumbled without a sound, face-planting into the mud. I rolled him over, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Rain washed the mud from his face. He was just a kid, maybe 30, with cold, dead eyes. I didn't have time for guilt. I ripped open the Velcro pouch on his tactical vest. No police badge. No sheriff's department insignia. I pulled out a wallet. Inside there was a key card, white plastic, a blue caduceus logo, and the words stamped in bold black letters, Thorn Medical Group, Security Division. Clearance Level 5. Lawrence Thorn. The name echoed in my head like a curse. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It wasn't just paranoia. The man who ran the biggest hospital network in the state, the man who had been a guest at my wedding, had sent a death squad to a graveyard to protect an empty coffin. I heard more voices approaching from the ridge. Contact lost with Unit 2. A voice crackled over the mercenaries' radio. I shoved the ID into my pocket and scrambled back to Silas. He was pale, his eyes rolling back, but he was alive. We couldn't stay here. We couldn't go back to the car. And we certainly couldn't go to the police. We moved deeper into the woods, wading through the freezing creek to throw off the scent dogs I knew they would bring. We walked for miles until the sounds of the pursuit faded into the rhythm of the storm. We emerged near an old service road at dawn, shivering, covered in mud and blood. I managed to flag down a trucker I knew from the old days, a man who didn't ask questions. He drove us to a veterinary clinic 3 towns over where a discreet doctor stitched Silas up for cash and a promise of silence. While Silas slept, I sat in the waiting room and turned on the small television in the corner. The morning news was on. The headline made my blood turn to ice. Breaking news: grave robbery at Willow Creek. Police are searching for David Harrison, 73, suspected of desecrating a family plot in a delusional episode. Authorities warn he is armed and mentally unstable. They had spun the narrative before the sun even came up. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the whistleblower. I was the villain, the crazy old man who dug up his sister's grave. I touched the plastic ID card in my pocket. I looked at the news ticker painting me as a monster. A calm, cold resolve settled over me. They wanted a villain, fine. I would be the villain. I would be the nightmare that Lawrence Thorn never saw coming. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to hunt. And I knew exactly where to start looking for the ghost named Tommy. I stood up, pain radiating through every joint, and walked out into the gray morning. The investigation was over. The war had just begun. The Starlight Motel was the kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask for identification as long as the cash was wrinkled and the customer didn't look like a cop. I paid the clerk, a kid with a neck tattoo and eyes that had seen too much $50 extra to forget he saw me. He slid a key across the counter without a word. Room 9. Around the back, out of sight of the main road. I locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle. The room smelled of stale smoke and cheap disinfectant, a scent that reminded me of every crime scene I had ever processed. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, my wet clothes clinging to my skin like a second freezing layer. My knee was throbbing with a rhythm that matched the neon sign buzzing outside the window, but I forced the pain into a box in the back of my mind. I had work to do. I pulled a burner phone from my pocket. I had bought it at a truck stop 3 towns back, along with a bottle of water and a pack of beef jerky. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago. It belonged to the only person left in this world who might still believe I wasn't crazy. Betty. Betty was my secretary at the insurance bureau for 25 years. She was 80 now, living in a retirement community in Florida, but she still had friends in the archives department. She was the kind of woman who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who sold the needle and how much they paid for it. The phone rang 4 times. Hello? Her voice was frail, trembling with age, but beneath the tremor was the steel I remembered. Betty, it is David. There was a long silence. I could hear the television playing a game show in the background. David, she whispered. I saw the news. They are saying terrible things. They say you dug up Catherine. They say you are dangerous. I need you to listen to me, Betty, I said, keeping my voice low. I did dig up the grave. But Catherine wasn't there. It was a doll, Betty. A doll with its face smashed in. I heard a sharp intake of breath. Oh, sweet Jesus. I am not crazy. I continued gripping the phone tight. Someone staged her death. And I think I know who. But I need proof. I need you to access the old microfilm records, the ones they haven't digitized yet. Can you still get into the system remotely or call someone who can? David, it is 3 a.m. Please, Betty. For Catherine. For the little girl you used to buy Girl Scout cookies from. She sighed, a sound of resignation and loyalty. Give me 10 minutes. What am I looking for? I need you to look at November 12th, 1981. The day Catherine died. Cross-reference that date with any business filings or grand openings associated with Lawrence Thorne or Thorne Medical Group. Thorne. The philanthropist. Just do it, Betty. I waited. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. I watched the shadows stretch across the peeling wallpaper. I checked my revolver. 5 rounds left. If they found me here, I wouldn't go quietly. The phone buzzed. I am here, David, Betty said. Her voice was different now. Tighter. Scared. What did you find? You were right to look at Thorne, she said. On November 12th, 1981, the exact day Catherine's car went off that bridge, Lawrence Thorne cut the ribbon on a new facility. The St. Jude Psychiatric Annex. It was a private wing off the books for state funding. St. Jude, I whispered. The place where the call came from. Who was the first patient, Betty, I asked. Who was admitted that day? There was a rustling of papers on her end. It is strange, David. The log shows only one admission for the entire week of the opening. It was a highly classified transfer. Name Thomas Miller. Thomas. Tommy. My blood ran cold. Does it say anything else? Description, age. That is the confusing part, Betty said. The intake form lists Thomas Miller as a male 30 years old, indigent, homeless, no next of kin. I closed my eyes. A dead end. No. The voice on the phone said, Tommy was a file number, not a name. Read the clinical notes, Betty. Read the first observation from the attending physician. I heard her typing. Okay, here it is. Initial assessment by Dr. L. Thorne. Patient arrives sedated. Heavy trauma. Diagnosis. She stopped. Betty, David. This doesn't make sense. The diagnosis is paranoid schizophrenia. But listen to the specific delusion noted. Read it. Patient exhibits a fixed, intractable delusion regarding their identity. Despite biological evidence to the contrary, the patient insists they are not Thomas Miller. Patient screams repeatedly that they are a woman. I felt tears prick my eyes. I knew it. What name does the patient claim, Betty? She paused and I could hear the fear in her voice. The notes say the patient claims to be Catherine Harrison. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was the smoking gun. Lawrence Thorne didn't just kidnap my sister. He erased her. He took a woman, drugged her, locked her in a basement, and created a paper trail for a man named Thomas Miller. He used the bureaucracy of the medical system to hide a human being in plain sight. If anyone ever looked for Catherine Harrison, they would find a grave. If anyone looked at the hospital records, they would see a homeless man. It was evil. It was brilliant. David, Betty said, her voice trembling. There is one more thing. What the file status? It was updated yesterday. Updated how St. Jude is closed. It is a digital tag, David, a transfer order. It says patient Thomas Miller is scheduled for termination of care. Reason compassionate release due to facility compromise. Termination of care. That was a euphemism. They knew I was coming. They knew the secret was leaking. They weren't moving her to another hospital. They were going to kill her. Where, Betty? Where are they taking her? There is no destination listed, she said. Just a transport code. Unit 404. But David, the timestamp. What about it? It says the transport is scheduled for tonight, at 4 a.m. I looked at my watch. It was 3:40. David, Betty cried. Do not go there. It is a trap. It has been a trap for 40 years, Betty, I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. I just finally realized I am, the one holding the cheese. Thank you. Lock your doors. Do not answer the phone for anyone but me. I hung up and crushed the burner phone under my heel. 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes to get to the extraction point. I didn't know where they were taking her, but I knew where they had to bring her out. The service tunnels. I kicked the chair away from the door and stepped out into the rain. The pain in my knee was gone, replaced by a cold, burning purpose. Lawrence Thorne had made one mistake. He thought Thomas Miller was just a file number. He forgot that Thomas Miller had a brother, and that brother was coming to collect. Thorne Medical Tower rose out of the darkness like a monolith of black glass and steel, a monument to arrogance built on a foundation of lies. It was a fortress surrounded by 12-foot fences, topped with razor wire, and patrolled by the same private security firm that had tried to bury me in the woods an hour ago. I parked the rusted waste disposal truck I had acquired from a desperate independent contractor 2 towns over in a dark alley a block away. The truck smelled of rot and antiseptic, a stomach-churning combination that clung to the fabric of the oversized gray coveralls I now wore. I pulled the brim of the stained baseball cap low over my eyes and checked my reflection in the side mirror. I did not look like David Harrison, the retired investigator. I looked like invisible labor. I looked like the kind of man people look through, not at. I checked my watch. 3:50 in the morning. I had 10 minutes before the transport team was scheduled to move her. 10 minutes to breach the most secure medical facility in the state, find a ghost, and get her out before they killed us both. My knee was a solid block of pain, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made it feel distant, like it belonged to someone else. I grabbed a heavy plastic waste bin on wheels, the kind used for biohazardous material, and pushed it toward the service entrance. The rear gate was guarded by a single sentry booth. The guard inside was young, bored, and scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up as the truck rumbled to a halt. This was the weak point in every security system I had ever tested. People assume the threat comes from the front door wearing a mask. They never expect the threat to come from the garbage disposal team smelling of bleach and decay. I stepped out of the cab, keeping my head down, and walked to the card reader. This was the moment of truth. If the key card I had taken from the mercenary in the woods had been deactivated, the alarms would scream, and I would be dead in 30 seconds. My hand shook slightly as I held the white plastic rectangle up to the sensor. The light on the reader blinked red. My heart stopped. I gripped the handle of the revolver hidden inside the waste bin. Then the light turned green. A heavy mechanical clank echoed through the night as the steel gate began to slide open. The system recognized the clearance level even if it didn't match the face. I didn't wait. I drove the truck through my breath, hitching in my throat, and backed it up to the loading dock. The loading bay was a cavern of concrete and fluorescent light. I rolled the bin out of the truck and moved toward the service elevator. 2 orderlies in scrubs were smoking by the door. They glanced at me, wrinkled their noses at the smell coming from my cart, and went back to their conversation. I was invisible. I was just part of the machinery that kept their pristine hospital clean. I entered the elevator and pressed the button for the sub-basement. Level B3. The button was unmarked, but I knew from the blueprints Betty had described that this was where the high-risk patients were kept. The elevator descended smoothly, the numbers on the display ticking down. Lobby, Basement 1, Basement 2. When the doors opened on Basement 3, the air changed. It was freezing down here. The silence was absolute, heavy, and oppressive. The floor was polished to a mirror shine reflecting the harsh white strip lighting overhead. There were no nurses' stations here. No get-well flowers. This was a prison disguised as a clinic. I pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking loudly in the empty corridor. I winced at the noise, but I kept my pace steady. Act like you belong. Walk with purpose. I passed doors with reinforced glass windows, but the rooms inside were dark. I needed the special care unit. I followed the signs toward the east wing. My footsteps echoed a lonely rhythm that seemed to mock my impossible mission. As I turned the corner, I saw it. A set of double doors at the end of the hall, guarded by a magnetic lock. I swiped the card again. Green light. The doors hissed open. I stepped into a short hallway lined with only 4 doors. The smell of jasmine was gone, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of ozone and high-grade sedatives. I scanned the room numbers. 401, 402, 403. And then at the very end, separated from the others by a red line painted on the floor, was room 404. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I abandoned the cart. I forgot the pain in my leg. I walked toward that door as if pulled by a gravity I couldn't resist. It was a heavy steel door devoid of a window, looking more like the entrance to a bank vault than a hospital room. Pinned to the center of the door was a laminated placard. I reached out my fingers, tracing the black letters, needing to feel the reality of the lie I had been told for 40 years. The sign didn't say Catherine Harrison. It didn't say sister. It read Patient Thomas Miller. Classification dangerous. Protocol no contact. Beneath the name in smaller red type was a handwritten note that made my blood boil. Prepare for final transfer. 0400 hours. I looked at my watch. 3:58. They were coming in 2 minutes. I pulled the revolver from my waistband and leveled it at the electronic lock. I didn't have the code. I didn't have time to hack it. I had to do this the hard way. I wrapped the gun in the thick fabric of my coveralls to muffle the sound and pressed the muzzle against the mechanism. I fired. The lock sparked and shattered. The mechanism groaned. I kicked the door once, twice, putting all my old man's strength into the blow. It swung inward with a heavy screech. I stepped into the darkness of the room, my gun raised, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. Tommy, I whispered, my voice breaking. There was no answer. Only the sound of ragged, shallow breathing coming from the corner. I fumbled for the wall switch and flicked the lights on. The room was bare. No television. No windows. Just a bolted-down bed in the center of the room. And on that bed, curled into a fetal ball, was a figure. I walked closer, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was dressed in a rough hospital gown. The head was shaved bald, the scalp pale and scarred. The arms were thin, wasted away from decades of confinement, covered in needle tracks. I reached out and touched the shoulder. The figure flinched violently, letting out a low, guttural whimper of terror. "It is okay," I said, tears streaming down my face. "It is David. I am here." The figure slowly uncurled. The face that looked up at me was a map of suffering. Deep wrinkles etched into the skin, eyes sunken and rimmed with red. It was the face of an old man, a stranger. But then the eyes focused on mine. They were green, bright emerald green with flecks of gold. The same eyes that used to watch me play baseball from the bleachers. The same eyes that had cried when our mother died. "Catherine," I choked out. The person on the bed blinked. The mouth opened, revealing teeth that had been neglected for years. A voice raspy and broken, unused to speaking anything but screams, whispered one word. "Davy." It was her nickname for me. Nobody else called me that. I dropped my gun. I fell to my knees beside the bed and wrapped my arms around the frail, broken body of my sister. She smelled of institutional soap and fear, But underneath it all, faint but present, was the smell of jasmine. "I found you," I sobbed, burying my face in her shoulder. "I found you." She clung to me with surprising strength, her fingers digging into my back. "They said you were dead," she whispered. "Lawrence said you died in the fire with me." "He lied," I said, pulling back to look at her. "He lied about everything. But we are leaving, now." Suddenly, the red alarm light above the door began to strobe. A klaxon blared through the facility, a deafening wail that signaled a security breach. I grabbed my gun from the floor. I looked at the door. I could hear heavy boots running down the hallway. The transport team. They weren't late. They were right on time. "Can you walk?" I asked her. Catherine swung her legs off the bed. She wobbled, but she stood. She looked at me, and for the first time in 40 years, I saw the sister I remembered. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger that matched my own. "For you, Davy," she said. "I can run." I kicked the door wide open. I raised the .38. I wasn't an old man anymore. I was a big brother. And God help anyone who tried to touch her again. The steel door groaned on its hinges as the echo of my kick faded into the humming silence of the room. I stepped across the threshold, my revolver raised, sweeping the darkness. The hallway behind me was chaotic with the sound of distant alarms, but inside room 4. 04, the air was dead. It was heavy and cold, smelling not of jasmine, but of concentrated bleach and something sharper, something chemical that stung the inside of my nose. It was the smell of the place where things are cleaned, but never truly clean. I fumbled for the wall switch with my free hand. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered to life with a sickening buzz, washing the room in a harsh clinical glare. It was not a prison cell. It was worse. It was a laboratory. The walls were padded with white acoustic foam. There were no windows, no clock, no television. Just a single metal cot bolted to the floor in the center of the room, and a stainless steel tray table covered in vials and syringes. And there, huddled in the far corner where the shadows still clung, was a figure. I lowered my weapon slowly. The person was curled into a tight ball, knees pressed against their chest, arms wrapped around their head, as if anticipating a blow. They were wearing a gray hospital gown that was 2 sizes too big, hanging loosely over a frame that looked skeletal. The head was shaved bald, the scalp pale and crossed with the faint white lines of old scars. I took a step forward. My boots squeaked on the linoleum. The figure flinched violently, a full-body tremor that broke my heart. "Tommy," I whispered. The name felt wrong in my mouth, like a lie I was forced to taste. The figure froze, slowly, agonizingly slowly. They lowered their arms. The head turned toward me. I stopped breathing. I was looking at the face of an old man. Or at least that is what the world would see. The skin was leathery and deep-pored. The jawline was square, hardened. There was a faint shadow of coarse stubble on the chin and upper lip. The Adam's apple was prominent. This was the face of Thomas Miller. This was the face in the file. But then the eyes opened. They were not the cloudy eyes of a stranger. They were green. A piercing, vibrant emerald green with jagged flecks of gold around the iris. I knew those eyes. I had seen them laugh over birthday cakes. I had seen them cry at our mother's funeral. I had seen them stare back at me from a mirror 1,000 times. They were the only thing in that room that time and torture hadn't been able to steal. Catherine. I choked the word, barely escaping my throat. The figure blinked. The heavy masculine brow furrowed. The mouth opened, revealing gums that were pale and teeth that had been neglected. Davy. The voice was a ruin. It was deep, raspy, broken by decades of screaming and silence. It sounded like gravel grinding together. But the cadence was hers. The nickname was hers. No one else on this earth called me Davy. I dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor, forgotten. I fell to my knees, ignoring the scream of pain from my bad joint, and crawled the last few feet toward her. "I am here," I sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand. "I am here, Kat. I am so sorry. I am so late." She didn't pull away this time. She looked at my hand, then at my face. She reached out with fingers that were gnarled and thin, her nails yellow and cracked. She touched my cheek. Her skin was rough, like sandpaper, but her touch was gentle. "You got old Davy," she rasped, a tear cutting a clean line through the grime on her cheek. I grabbed her hand and pressed it to my face, weeping openly. "I thought you were dead. I buried you." I identified the locket. The locket, she whispered, a strange, hysterical smile twisting her lips. "He took it off my neck. After the injections started. After the first surgery." I pulled back, looking at her, palely looking at her. The horror of what I was seeing began to dawn on me. It wasn't just age. It wasn't just starvation. The stubble, the deepened voice, the altered bone structure of her face. "What did he do to you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like white heat. She looked down at her body hidden beneath the shapeless gown. "He didn't just want to hide me, Davy," she said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "He wanted to unmake me. He said a dead woman is suspicious, but a crazy man with a number, no one looks for him." She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "He gave me shots," she said. "Every week for 40 years. Testosterone, steroids, things that burned my veins. He made my hair fall out. He made my voice drop. He changed my body, Davy. He turned me into Tommy. He killed Catherine inch by inch, but he wouldn't let me die." I stared at the vials on the tray table. The labels were complex chemical compounds, hormone blockers, synthetic androgens. Lawrence Thorne hadn't just imprisoned her. He had conducted a 40-year medical experiment to erase her gender, to rewrite her biology, so that even if she escaped, no one would believe she was the missing heiress from 1981. It was a cruelty so sophisticated, so thorough, that it defied sanity. "He is sick," I spat. "He is a monster. He is a businessman," she corrected me, her eyes darting to the door. "And I am his bank." "What do you mean?" She pulled the collar of her gown down. At the base of her spine, right above the hip bone, was a fresh bandage. It was stained with yellow fluid. "He doesn't keep me alive because he loves me," she said, her voice trembling. "He keeps me alive because I have the anomaly, the rare antibody in my spinal fluid, the one that cures the blood disease his wealthy clients pay millions to treat." My stomach churned. I remembered the rumors about Thorne Medical's miracle treatments for the elite, the youth serums, the regenerative therapies. "I am not a patient, Davy," she whispered, clutching my shirt. "I am livestock. I am a harvest." Suddenly the heavy thud of boots echoed in the corridor outside. They were close, very close. Catherine's eyes widened in terror. She dug her fingernails into my arm. "You have to kill me, Davy," she pleaded, shaking me. "Do not let him take me again." "No," I said, grabbing her shoulders. "We are walking out of here." "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." She started to sing, her voice cracking, rocking back and forth. It was the defense mechanism of a broken mind, trying to find a safe place. "Stop it," I ordered, shaking her gently. "Look at me. I am not leaving you. Can you stand?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Hurry," she hissed. "He is coming. Lawrence, he is coming for the final extraction. He told me this morning. He said he needs all of it. He said he is going to drain me dry before he burns the building. All of it." That meant death. They weren't moving her. They were liquidating her. I snatched my revolver from the floor. I checked the cylinder. 5 rounds. There were at least 6 men outside. The math was bad, but I didn't care. I pulled Catherine to her feet. She was light, frail, but she stood. I took off my heavy coveralls and draped them over her shoulders to hide the hospital gown. "Stay behind me," I said, gripping her hand. "If anyone comes through that door, I'm going to shoot them. I don't care if it is the Pope. I don't care if it is the President." She looked at me, and for a second, the old man disguise faded, and I saw the little sister who used to follow me into the woods. "I know, Davy," she whispered. "Papa's gonna buy you a hummingbird." I kicked the door wide open, stepping out into the hallway, gun raised. The corridor was empty for now, but the elevator numbers were ticking down. B1, B2, B3. Lawrence was here, and he was about to find out that his lab rat had teeth. We moved into the corridor, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like a hive of angry hornets. I kept my gun trained on the far end of the hall, my other arm wrapped tight around Catherine's waist. She was light, terribly light, like a bird made of hollow bones and dry parchment. Every step she took was a battle against 40 years of atrophy, but she moved with a grim determination that I recognized. It was the Harrison blood. We do not break easily. As we shuffled toward the service elevator, the silence of the basement stretched tight, waiting to snap. I needed to keep her focused. I needed to understand the madness that had stolen her life. "Catherine," I whispered, keeping my eyes scanning the shadows. "You said he sells babies. You said that is why he did this." She leaned heavily against me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "It was 1981, Davy," she rasped, her voice echoing softly against the cold tile. "I was working late in the archives. I found the ledger. Lawrence wasn't just running a fertility clinic. He was running a market." I felt a chill run down my spine. A market. He was telling poor girls their babies had died during childbirth, she continued, her fingers digging into my shirt. He would show them a dead infant, usually a premature stillborn, he kept on ice for the purpose. Then he would take the healthy living babies and sell them. Senators, judges, oil tycoons, anyone with $50,000 and a desire for an heir. I saw the names Davy. I saw the receipts. I grit my teeth. Lawrence Thorne, the philanthropist, the pillar of the community. He was a monster in a tailored suit. "I was going to the police," Catherine said, a sob catching in her throat. "I called him. I told him I knew. I thought he would surrender. I was so naive. That night he ran my car off the bridge. But the body, I asked, my mind racing. The body in the car. The locket." "It wasn't me," she whispered. "It was a homeless woman he had picked up from the shelter that morning. He killed her, Davy. He put my clothes on her. He put my locket around her neck. Then he set the car on fire. I watched it on the news from a hospital bed in his private wing. I watched you cry at my funeral while I was strapped down screaming your name behind soundproof glass." I stopped walking for a second. The cruelty was suffocating. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to find Lawrence Thorne and tear him apart with my bare hands, but we had to keep moving. The elevator was just 20 yards away. "Why didn't he kill you?" I asked, the question burning in my throat. "If you knew everything, why keep you alive? Why do this to you?" Catherine stopped. She turned her face to me, and in the harsh light, the tragedy of her transformation was undeniable. The masculine jaw, the shaved head, the rough skin. It was a mask of flesh forced upon her. "Because he loved me," she said, the words dripping with bile. I stared at her. Love. This was not love. This was a desecration. "He told me that if he killed me, he would lose me," she said, her voice trembling. "But he couldn't let me be Catherine Harrison anymore. Catherine Harrison was a liability. Catherine Harrison had a family who would look for her. So he decided to make me into something else. Something only he could possess." She touched her bald scalp. He said he was playing God, Davy. He said he would strip away the woman until only the soul remained, and that soul would belong to him. He injected me with the hormones. He ordered the surgeries. He turned me into Tommy so that I could hide in plain sight. He told me that Tommy was his creation, his secret souvenir. He would come down here at night, Davy. He would sit by my bed and read poetry to me while I lay there trapped in this body he built. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a specimen. He wanted a pet that could never leave the cage because the world outside would never understand what it was. I felt sick. It was a possession so total, so twisted that it made simple murder look like an act of mercy. Lawrence Thorne hadn't just stolen her life. He had stolen her identity, her gender, her very name, all to satisfy a psychotic need for control. "We are almost there," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. "The elevator is right there. We are going to the roof. I have a plan." We reached the end of the hall. I pressed the call button. The light didn't turn on. I pressed it again. Nothing. Suddenly, the heavy steel fire doors at both ends of the corridor slammed shut with a deafening boom. The sound reverberated through the basement like a thunderclap. We were trapped in a 50-foot stretch of hallway. "No," I shouted, rushing to the doors. I kicked them, threw my shoulder against them, but they were magnetic locks. Solid steel, immovable. Catherine slid down the wall, clutching her chest. "He knows," she whispered. "He is watching." Then came the sound. A soft, sinister hiss. I looked up. From the ventilation grates in the ceiling, a white mist began to pour down. It wasn't smoke. It was heavier than air, curling toward the floor like searching fingers. "Gas," I yelled. "Cover your mouth!" I pulled the collar of my shirt up over my nose and dropped to my knees beside Catherine. I tried to shield her, but the gas was filling the space rapidly. It smelled sweet, sickly sweet, like rotting flowers and ether. I raised my gun at the camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling and fired. The lens shattered, but it didn't stop the gas. "Davy," Catherine murmured, her eyes starting to roll back. "I am tired. Stay with me." I coughed, my own vision beginning to blur. The edges of the world were turning gray. My limbs felt heavy as if the gravity in the room had suddenly doubled. I tried to stand up to find a vent to do something, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I slumped against the wall next to my sister. The gun slipped from my fingers. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the elevator doors slowly sliding open. But it wasn't a rescue team. It was a pair of polished black dress shoes stepping out into the mist. And then a voice, smooth and cultured, filtering through a gas mask. "Hello, Tommy. Hello, David. I am so glad the family is finally reunited." I tried to lift my hand to fight, but the floor rose up to meet me and everything went black. Consciousness returned to me in fragments. First came the throbbing headache, a dull rhythm behind my eyes that felt like a sledgehammer striking a steel plate. Then came the dryness in my throat, tasting of copper and chemical dust. Finally, the sensation of restriction. My arms were pulled back at an unnatural angle, my wrists burning against the bite of plastic zip ties. My ankles were bound to the legs of a heavy chair. I opened my eyes. The harsh fluorescent glare of the basement hallway was gone, replaced by the warm amber glow of a vintage desk lamp. I was in an office. It smelled of mahogany, old paper, and expensive scotch. It was the kind of room where decisions were made that destroyed lives, all while the people making them sat in comfortable leather chairs. "You are awake." The voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. I lifted my head, fighting the wave of nausea that rolled through my stomach. Sitting behind the massive desk, looking as if he had just come from a charity gala, was Dr. Lawrence Thorne. He was 75 years old, but he wore his age like a crown. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit was impeccable, and his hands resting gently on the leather blotter were manicured and steady. He didn't look like a madman who kept people in cages. He looked like a grandfather. He looked like a savior. And standing next to him, staring out the window at the darkness, was Mark. "My son, my boy." "The sheriff, Mark," I croaked, my voice raw. "Mark, arrest him." He confessed. "He has Catherine." Mark did not turn around. He kept his back to me, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in that parade rest stance I had taught him when he entered the academy. Lawrence Thorne chuckled softly. He stood up and walked around the desk, holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't hateful. It was disappointed. David. David. You always were so linear in your thinking. Arrest me for what? For advancing human evolution, for saving a life." He gestured to the corner of the room. I followed his gaze and felt my heart shatter. Catherine was there, tied to a matching chair. Her head hung low, her chin resting on her chest. She was conscious, but barely. Her green eyes looked at me with a dull, hopeless acceptance. "You didn't save her," I spat, struggling against the ties. "You erased her. You turned her into a monster to hide your crimes." "I preserved her." Thorne corrected me, his voice sharpening. "Do you have any idea how rare her genetic profile is? Her spinal fluid contains a protein structure that is 1 in a billion. It is the key to regenerating neural tissue. The elite of this world. David, the people who actually matter, they pay me fortunes to live a little longer, to think a little clearer. Catherine is the source. She is the fountain. If I had let her go to the police 40 years ago, she would have been a footnote in a scandal. Here she is a god. She is the most valuable human being on the planet." He took a sip of his drink, savoring it. Turning her into Tommy was a necessary sacrifice. It was camouflage. A dead woman draws attention. A missing woman draws hunters. But a schizophrenic man, in the basement of a state facility, he is invisible. He is safe. I gave her a purpose, David. I gave her existence meaning beyond being a small-town girl with a secret. "You are insane," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I am a visionary," he replied coldly. "But visionaries are often misunderstood by men of limited scope. Men like you." He turned to Mark. "Sheriff Harrison understands." "Don't you, Mark?" My son slowly turned away from the window. His face was a mask of stone. His eyes, usually so warm, were dead voids. He looked at me and then he looked at Thorne. "Mark, please," I begged, pulling at my restraints until my skin tore. "He is lying to you. Whatever he is paying you, it is not worth it. I am your father. That is your aunt. Do something." Mark walked over to the desk. He didn't look at me. He picked up a file folder, the same one I had seen on his desk earlier, the one labeled Project TOMMY. He opened it and pulled out a piece of paper. It was old, yellowed at the edges, a birth certificate, and a bill of sale. I stopped struggling. I stared at the papers. Why, I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Mark finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was empty. "Because I am not your son, David." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I blinked, trying to process them. "What, I am not your biological son?" He repeated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Mom, Martha. She couldn't have kids. You knew that. You adopted me when I was 3 days old. You told me my parents died in a car crash." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "We adopted you. We loved you. You are my son in every way that matters." Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. He tossed the paper onto my lap. "My parents didn't die in a car crash, David. My mother was a 16-year-old girl from Alabama who was told her baby was stillborn. Dr. Thorne delivered me. And then Dr. Thorne sold me. To you. Or rather, to the agency you used. He gestured to Thorne, who was watching the scene with a look of mild amusement. He kept the records, Mark said, pointing a shaking finger at the doctor. He kept records on all of us. The stolen babies. He approached me 6 months ago, just as my campaign for mayor was starting to gain traction. He showed me the proof. So what? I shouted. So what if you were adopted? Who cares? The voters won't care. They will care if they find out the sheriff is the product of a black market human trafficking ring. Mark snapped, his voice finally cracking. They will care if they find out my biological father is a convicted felon that Thorne tracked down just to prove a point. My career, my life, everything I have built it, is all based on the lie that I am a Harrison, that I come from good, honest stock. If this gets out, I am finished. I lose the election. I lose my pension. I lose everything. I stared at him, horror washing over me. He was trading our lives for his reputation. He was trading his father's life for a mayor's seat. Markwin whispered, my voice breaking. I changed your diapers. I taught you to ride a bike. I held you when you cried over your first heartbreak. Biology is ink on paper. Family is blood and sweat and time. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Mark looked away. His jaw tightened. It means something, he said softly. But it doesn't mean enough. Not anymore. This is the real world, David. In the real world, power wins. Sentimentality gets you killed. Thorne clapped his hands together, a sharp sound that made us all jump. Beautifully said, Mark. Truly. A pragmatic decision for a pragmatic future. Thorne walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a syringe. He filled it with the clear liquid from a vial on his desk. Then he pulled out a second syringe and did the same. We need to wrap this up, Thorne said, walking toward Catherine. The transport is compromised. We cannot move her now. And David... Well, David has become a nuisance. He looked at Mark. Here is the narrative, Sheriff. Pay attention. David Harrison, suffering from advanced dementia and grief, broke into the facility. He found his long-lost sister, who was living here as a patient. In a fit of despair, realizing her condition, he decided to end her suffering. He injected her with a lethal dose of morphine. And then, unable to live with what he had done, he turned the needle on himself. A tragic murder-suicide. The community will mourn. You will give a tearful press conference. And Thorne Medical will quietly demolish this building next week to erase the bad memories. Thorne held the syringes out to Mark. Finish it, he ordered. Mark stared at the needles. His hand hesitated for a fraction of a second. Do it, Thorne commanded, his voice losing its warmth. Or I release the file. And I release the video of you standing here right now. You are complicit, Mark. There is no going back. You are either with me or you are in the cell next to them. Mark took a deep breath. He reached out and took the syringes. He turned to face me. I looked at my son. I looked for the little boy who used to wait by the window for me to come home. I looked for the man who swore an oath to protect and serve. I didn't see him. I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. I am sorry, Dad, he whispered. He walked toward Catherine first. She looked up at him, her green eyes wide with terror. She tried to scream, but the gag in her mouth turned it into a muffled whimper. Don't touch her, I roared, thrashing against the chair until the wood creaked. Mark. Don't you do this, Mark ignored me. He leaned over Catherine, finding the vein in her thin, wasted arm. He uncapped the needle. I closed my eyes. I couldn't watch. I had failed. I had found her only to watch her die again. But then I heard a whisper. Not from Mark, from Catherine. She had managed to work the gag down just an inch. Tommy, she whispered. Mark froze. The needle hovered an inch from her skin. What did you say? Mark asked, his voice trembling. Tommy, she repeated, tears streaming down her face. That is what you called your imaginary friend. When you were little, before you could talk, you called him Tommy. Mark went pale. He looked at me. How does she know that he demanded? I never told anyone that. Not even you. I looked at him confused. I don't know. You used to babble to the empty chair in your room. You called it Tommy. We thought it was just a sound. Mark looked back at Catherine. She was staring at him with an intensity that burned. I heard you, she rasped. Through the vents. When you came to visit David at work. When you were small. I was in the basement. I could hear the pipes. I heard you talking to your friend. I used to talk back. I was your Tommy. The syringe shook in Mark's hand. You were the voice in the vents. I told you stories, Catherine whispered. I told you about the hummingbird. Mark stumbled back as if he had been punched. He dropped the syringe. It clattered on the floor, rolling under the desk. Thorne's face twisted into a snarl. Enough of this nonsense, Thorne barked. He is losing his nerve. Give me the damn needle. Thorne lunged forward, snatching the second syringe from Mark's hand. He moved toward me with a speed that belied his age, his eyes manic. If you won't do it, I will. He raised the needle, aiming for my neck. No, Mark screamed. But he didn't move to stop him. He just stood there, paralyzed by the collision of his past and his ambition. I braced myself for the prick of the needle. I braced myself for the darkness. But the darkness didn't come. Instead, the room exploded in sound. Not a gunshot, but the shattering of glass. And suddenly, the balance of power in the room shifted violently. Because Lawrence Thorne had made the one mistake all arrogant men make. He forgot to check who else was listening. The barrel of the gun looked like a black tunnel that went on forever. I could see the rifling inside the muzzle. I could see the tension in Mark's index finger as it whitened against the trigger. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the ragged, wet breathing of Lawrence Thorne, who stood watching with the anticipation of a spectator at a gladiator match. I closed my eyes. I did not want the last image I took to the grave to be the face of my son contorted into the mask of a killer. I thought of Martha. I thought of the smell of her hair. I thought of the day Mark graduated from the academy, how proud I was when I pinned that badge on his chest. I whispered a silent prayer, not for my soul, but for his. I prayed that this act would not break him, that he would find a way to live with the blood on his hands. And then the world exploded. The sound of the gunshot was not a pop like in the movies. It was a thunderclap that slammed into my chest and rang in my ear like a church bell. I flinched, my entire body bracing for the burning impact of the bullet, for the darkness that comes after the light. I waited for the end. 1 second, 2 seconds. But the pain never came. Instead, a scream tore through the silence. It was a high, guttural shriek of agony that did not belong to me. I opened my eyes. Mark was still standing there, the smoke drifting lazily from the barrel of his Glock, but the gun was not pointed at me anymore. It was angled downward and to the left. Lawrence Thorne was on the floor. He was clutching his right knee, which was now a ruin of expensive fabric and shattered bone. Blood, dark and arterial, pumped through his fingers, staining the pristine Persian rug. He howled, rolling on his side, his face twisted in a rictus of shock and disbelief. Mark didn't hesitate. He stepped over the writhing doctor and kicked the second syringe away, sending it skittering into the shadows. He kept the weapon trained on Thorne's head, his hand steady as a rock. "Stay down!" Mark roared, his voice booming with the authority of the sheriff he truly was. "If you move so much as an inch, the next one goes between your eyes." Thorne looked up, his face pale and sweating. "You traitor," he spat, blood flecking his lips. "I made you. I gave you a future. I own you." Mark looked at me. The cold, dead look in his eyes vanished, replaced by the warmth and concern I had missed all night. He holstered his weapon and rushed to my side, pulling a pocket knife to cut the zip ties binding my wrists. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. I rubbed my raw wrists, staring at him. "You shot him. You actually shot him. I thought you were going to kill me. I thought I had lost you." Mark helped me stand, supporting my weight, as my bad knee threatened to buckle. He looked at me with a dark, weary humor. "I almost did lose it," Mark admitted. "You really sold the dementia act back at the station, Dad. But you were tapping on the desk." I smiled a weak, relieved smile. It was a gamble. When Mark had left the room to get water back at the police station, I had tapped a rhythm on the wooden surface. 3 short taps. 3 long taps. 3 short taps. SOS. And then a specific pattern we practiced when he was a Boy Scout in the backyard sitting in a tent with flashlights. Dash. Dot. Dash. The code for play along. I didn't know if he remembered. It had been 30 years. I didn't know if he was even listening. "I heard it," Mark said, looking down at Thorne, who was now sobbing into the carpet. "I heard the rhythm. I knew something was wrong. I knew you weren't crazy, but I had to get you inside. I had to get us both in a room with him to get a confession. I knew if I arrested you, he would just make you disappear. I had to make him believe I was on his side." "But the adoption papers," I stammered, pointing to the yellowed documents scattered on the floor. "He said you knew. He said you were one of the stolen babies." Mark looked at the papers and then kicked them aside with disgust. "I knew, Dad. I found the papers in the attic when I was 12. I was looking for Christmas presents, and I found the box. I knew I was adopted. I knew I came from somewhere else. But I never said anything because it didn't matter." He turned to me, gripping my shoulders with both hands, forcing me to look him in the eye. "You taught me how to shave. You taught me how to drive a stick shift. You sat up with me all night when I had the flu and wiped my forehead with a cool cloth. You are the one who showed me what it means to be a man. That man on the floor might have delivered me, and he might have sold me like a piece of meat, but he is not my father. You are. And no amount of ink or blood or money changes that." I felt tears streaming down my face, hot and cleansing. I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his shoulder. For a moment, amidst the horror and the smell of gunpowder, everything was right. "We need to go," Catherine rasped from her chair. Her voice was weak but urgent. Mark rushed over to her, cutting her bonds. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and sadness. "I am sorry, Aunt Catherine," he said softly. "I am sorry I didn't know." She touched his face with her scarred hand. "You are a good boy, Tommy. You are a good boy." Mark helped her stand. We were a family again. Broken, battered, but united. We turned toward the door, ready to leave this nightmare behind. But the moment was cut short by a sound that made my blood freeze. A mechanical whirring like gears grinding together. I spun around. Lawrence Thorne was moving, dragging his shattered leg behind him like a dead weight, leaving a smear of crimson across the floor. He was pulling himself toward the heavy oak desk. "The kill switch," Catherine screamed. "Stop him!" Thorne had pulled a hidden panel open on the side of the desk. Beneath it, glowing with a sinister red light, was a button encased in glass. His face was no longer the face of a man. It was the face of a demon contorted by pain and spite. "If I can't have my legacy," he screamed, his voice breaking into a manic, wet laugh, "then no one leaves this room. No one leaves." Mark raised his gun. "Drop it, Lawrence. Don't do it." But Thorne didn't stop. He was fueled by absolute refusal to lose. To him, we were not people. We were assets that had malfunctioned, and assets that cannot be controlled must be liquidated. His hand, shaking and bloody, hovered over the glass case. "Burn with her," he shrieked. He slammed his fist down, shattering the glass, and depressing the button. A siren began to wail loud enough to crack the walls. The floor beneath us shuddered. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Catherine. "Run!" The floor beneath us shuddered as if the building itself was gasping for air. The alarm was no longer just a sound, but a physical vibration that rattled my teeth and shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. Lawrence Thorne had triggered the failsafe, and the basement, the very heart of his dark empire, was now a cauldron of expanding fire. I could feel the heat rising through the soles of my boots, a terrifying reminder that we were standing on top of a bomb that had already gone off. I turned to Catherine. She was standing there swaying like a reed in a storm, her green eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. She was free, yes, but 40 years of confinement and chemical manipulation had left her frail. She could not run, not like we needed to run. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the odds. I did what a big brother does. I crouched down, ignoring the scream of protest from my arthritic knees, and grabbed her arm. "Get on my back!" I shouted over the roar of the siren. She hesitated, looking at my gray hair, my trembling hands. "Davy, you can't," she whispered. "I am too heavy." "You are light as a feather, hit." I lied, grabbing her wrists and pulling her forward. "Now hold on and don't let go no matter what happens." She wrapped her thin arms around my neck. I gritted my teeth and stood up. She was light, terribly light, a bird made of hollow bones and fragile skin. But the weight shifted my center of gravity, sending a fresh spike of agony through my bad leg. I pushed the pain down into a dark box in my mind. I locked it away. I wasn't 73 anymore. I was a machine built for one purpose: extraction. Mark was already at the door, his service weapon drawn, his body angled to cover us. He looked back, his face smeared with soot and sweat, his eyes hard. He wasn't the conflicted son anymore. He was the sheriff. He was the point man. "Stay low, Dad," he barked. "Stay directly behind me. We are going to the east stairwell." We burst out of the office into the corridor. The hallway, once pristine and sterile, was now a tunnel of choking gray smoke. The emergency lights strobed in a disorienting rhythm of red and black. We moved as a single unit, a desperate train cutting through the haze. Suddenly, shapes emerged from the smoke ahead. Shadows with rifles, Thorne's private security, the cleanup crew. They were wearing gas masks that made them look like insects devoid of humanity. They weren't here to rescue anyone. They were here to ensure that the secrets of Thorne Medical burned with the building. Mark didn't hesitate. He didn't shout a warning. He fired. 2 controlled bursts. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The first shadow dropped. The second returned, fire sparks flying from the metal doorframe next to my head. I ducked, shielding Catherine with my body, feeling her tremble against my back. "Keep moving," Mark roared, advancing on the threat. He moved with a fluidity I hadn't seen since his academy days, suppressing the target, closing the distance. He tackled the second mercenary, slamming him against the wall with a bone-crunching impact. The rifle skittered across the floor. Mark didn't stop. He neutralized the threat and waved us forward, his chest heaving. We reached the stairwell door. Mark kicked it open. I expected to see concrete steps leading down to safety. Instead, I saw hell. The bottom of the stairwell had been blown out by the basement explosion. The stairs ended abruptly at the 3rd floor landing, breaking off into a jagged edge of rebar and crumbled cement. Below us, a chasm of fire roared upward, a chimney of orange and yellow flames that licked at the soles of our shoes. The heat was instantaneous, searing my eyebrows and sucking the moisture from my eyes. "We can't go down," Mark shouted, shielding his face from the thermal blast. "The stairs are gone." "We have to go up," I yelled back, shouting into his ear. "The roof, maybe the chopper pad." We turned to run up, but a massive section of the ceiling above us gave way, crashing down onto the 4th floor landing, blocking the path upward with a wall of burning debris. We were trapped, boxed in on the 3rd floor landing. Below was fire. Above was fire. Behind us was a hallway full of smoke and gunmen. I looked over the railing. The lobby floor was 40 feet down, hidden by smoke. But directly below us, maybe 12 feet down, was a decorative marble ledge that jutted out from the second-floor mezzanine. It was wide enough to stand on, and from there a maintenance ladder led down to the ground floor awning. 12 feet. It is an easy jump for a teenager. It is a broken leg for a middle-aged man. It is a death sentence for a 70-year-old woman with osteoporosis. "We can't jump," Mark said, looking at the drop. "She will break every bone in her body." I looked around frantically. No fire hose, no rope, nothing but concrete and steel. Then my hand brushed against my waist. My belt. It was a thick, full-grain leather belt. Heavy duty. Martha had bought it for me 20 years ago at a craft fair in Texas. She had joked that it was strong enough to tow a pickup truck. I had worn it every day since she died. It was the only part of her I had left. I ripped the belt off my hands, shaking. I looked at the standpipe of the dry riser system bolted to the wall. It was a heavy iron pipe. I looped the belt through the wheel of the valve and buckled it tight. It wasn't long enough to reach the ledge, but it created a loop, a handle that hung down about 3 feet. "Mark," I shouted, grabbing his shoulder, "listen to me. The drop is too far. But if you hang from this belt, you cut the distance. You drop, you land on the ledge. Then I lower Catherine as far as I can. You catch her." Mark looked at the belt, then at the fire raging below. It was a desperate, insane plan. "It won't hold us," he argued. "It held my pants up for 20 years, son," I yelled, forcing a grin I didn't feel. "It will hold. Now go. That is an order." Mark looked at me, then at Catherine. He holstered his gun. He grabbed the leather loop. He swung his legs over the railing. The belt groaned, the leather stretching tight, but the buckle held. He lowered himself, his muscles straining. He hung there for a second, dangling over the abyss, then let go. He fell 8 feet. He hit the marble ledge hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He scrambled to his feet, waving his arms. "I am good," he screamed up at me. "Send her down." I turned to Catherine. She was coughing, her face gray with soot. I cupped her cheeks in my hands. "Cat," I said, my voice breaking. "I need you to trust me one last time. I am going to lower you over the side. You have to let go when I say let go. Mark will catch you." She looked at the fire, then at me. Her eyes were clear. "I am not afraid, Davy," she whispered. "Not with you." I lifted her over this railing. She weighed nothing. I held her by her wrists, leaning over as far as I could, extending my arms until my joints popped. The heat from the shaft was cooking my face, blistering the skin on my hands. "Ready," I screamed down at Mark. "Ready," he yelled back, his arms raised. I let go. Catherine fell through the smoke. It felt like watching a piece of my soul plummet into the dark. But then I saw Mark's strong arms wrap around her. He staggered back, hitting the wall, but he didn't fall. He had her. She was safe. "Now you, Dad," Mark screamed, looking up. "Hurry! The pipe is bending." I climbed over the railing. I grabbed the belt. I could feel the heat radiating from the metal pipe. It was glowing red. I swung my weight out over the void, and that is when I heard it. A sharp metallic ping. The heat had weakened the bolts anchoring the standpipe to the concrete wall. My weight was the final straw. With a groan of tearing metal, the pipe pulled away from the wall. I didn't have time to think. I threw my weight backward, flinging myself back onto the landing, just as the pipe, the valve, and my belt tore free and plummeted into the darkness below. I landed hard on my back, the breath knocked out of me. I rolled over and crawled to the edge. The lifeline was gone. The gap was 12 feet. Without the belt to lower me, without someone to break my fall, the jump would shatter my legs, and I would likely tumble off the narrow ledge, taking Mark and Catherine with me. "Dad," Mark screamed, his voice raw with panic. "Dad, what happened? Jump. I will try to catch you." I looked down. The fire was rising fast now, consuming the air. The smoke was getting thicker, turning from gray to black. I looked at my son. I looked at my sister. They were huddled together on that narrow ledge, alive. They had a path down. They had a future. I cannot jump, Mark. I wheezed, my throat closing up. It is too far. Go. Get her out. No, Mark howled, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. No, I am not leaving you. We go together or we don't go. I looked at him and I saw the little boy who wouldn't leave my side when I was sick. I loved him so much, it hurt more than the fire. You are not leaving me, son, I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. You are saving the truth. You are saving the family. That is my command as your father. Go, now, before the ledge collapses. The building gave another violent shudder. A chunk of concrete the size of a car crashed down past them, missing the ledge by inches. Mark flinched. He looked at the structural damage above him. He knew I was right. He knew the physics. I love you, Dad, he screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. I love you, son, I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me. Mark grabbed Catherine's hand. He looked back up at me one last time, a look of pure devastation, and then he pulled her toward the maintenance ladder. They disappeared into the smoke. I was alone. The heat was unbearable now. My coveralls were smoking. I dragged myself back from the edge, retreating into the corner of the landing. There was nowhere to go. The door behind me was blocked. The stairs were gone. The roof was collapsed. I sat down against the hot wall. My knee was throbbing, a steady drumbeat of pain that told me I was still alive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the tape recorder. It was still there. The evidence. The story. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, quiet pride. I had done it. I had finished the case. I had saved the girl. The flames crested the landing, curling around my boots like hungry snakes. I thought of the cool porch in the evenings. I thought of the smell of rain. I whispered Martha's name, and then the floor beneath me gave way, and I fell into the heart of the fire. The fall should have killed me. By all laws of physics and frail biology, plunging through a collapsing floor into an inferno should have been the final period at the end of my sentence. But fate, it seems, has a twisted sense of humor, or perhaps it just wasn't done with me yet. I landed hard on a mound of drywall and twisted rebar about 10 feet below the impact, knocking the breath from my lungs in a violent whoosh. I lay there for a second, gasping, staring up at the hole I had just fallen through, watching the flames lick the edges like hungry tongues. The heat was no longer a presence. It was a physical weight, crushing and absolute. My coveralls were smoldering. My eyebrows were gone. Every inch of exposed skin felt tight and screaming. I tried to stand, but my legs refused. I dragged myself across the debris, looking for a way out, but there was none. Walls of fire surrounded me. I was in the center of the kiln. I closed my eyes, ready to accept it. I had saved them. That was enough. But then through the shimmering heat haze, I saw it. It was a large gray steel cabinet sitting miraculously upright in the corner of the room, shielded by a fallen concrete beam. I recognized it instantly. It was a Fire King data safe, a behemoth of engineering, designed to protect sensitive magnetic media from temperatures up to 2,000 degrees for hours. In my 30 years as an insurance investigator, I had processed dozens of claims involving these safes. I knew they were double-walled, insulated with a slurry of gypsum and concrete, and built to survive the apocalypse. It was designed to save hard drives, not humans. But I was a small man shrunk by age and adrenaline, and I was desperate. I crawled toward it, my fingernails scraping against the hot floor. I reached the handle. It was hot, searingly hot, but I yanked it down. The heavy door swung open. Inside, it was crammed with files and backup tapes. I didn't think. I grabbed armfuls of Lawrence Thorne's dirty secrets and threw them into the fire. I cleared the space. I squeezed myself inside the dark, cramped metal box, curling my knees to my chest in a fetal position. It was a coffin of steel, but it was the only lifeboat I had. I pulled the heavy door shut until the latch clicked. Darkness. Absolute suffocating darkness. The roar of the fire was instantly muffled, replaced by the sound of my own ragged, terrified breathing. The air inside was stale and limited. I knew I had maybe an hour of oxygen, perhaps less. The metal walls began to warm up. I closed my eyes and thought of the ocean. I thought of the cool blue water of the Atlantic. I thought of Martha. I drifted away into the black. I do not know how much time passed. It could have been minutes. It could have been days. The next thing I knew was a vibration, a grinding, screaming noise of metal on metal that vibrated through my bones. Then a crack of light. Blinding, white, painful light. Hands grabbed me. Rough, gloved hands. "We have a survivor," a voice shouted, sounding distant and underwater. They pulled me out of the oven. The air tasted of soot and water, but it was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I was placed on a stretcher. I tried to speak, to ask about them, but my throat was a ruin of ash. I looked up and saw the night sky obscured by smoke, but beautiful. I saw flashing red lights, and then breaking through the line of firefighters, I saw him. Mark ran to the stretcher. He was weeping, his face a mask of soot and tears. He fell to his knees beside me, burying his face in my chest, sobbing like a child. "I thought you were gone," he choked out. "I thought you were gone." I lifted a trembling hand and patted his head. Behind him, wrapped in a yellow shock blanket, sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, was a woman with short, ragged hair and green eyes. She raised a hand. She smiled. It was the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. Lawrence Thorne did not die in the fire. He was dragged out by the SWAT team, found cowering in his private bunker, burned and broken, screaming about his legacy and his rights. He spent his final days not in a mansion, but in the infirmary of a maximum security federal prison, stripped of his suits, his dignity, and his name. He died of a blood infection before his trial could conclude, alone and unmourned. The scandal that followed broke the nation. It was on every channel, every newspaper front page. The stolen babies, the illegal experiments, the 40-year kidnapping of Catherine Harrison. Thorne Medical was dismantled, its assets seized, its board of directors indicted. Mark was cleared of all wrongdoing after I handed over the tapes from my recorder, which had survived the fire, in my pocket. In fact, he was re-elected sheriff by a landslide. The town didn't care about his DNA. They cared that he was the man who burned down the house of cards to save his family. That was 6 months ago. Today, the air does not smell of smoke and antiseptic. It smells of salt and hibiscus. I am sitting on the porch of a small bungalow on the Florida coast. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that no fire could ever mimic. My knee still hurts when it rains, and I have a few new scars to add to the collection, but I can walk. I can breathe. Next to me, sitting in a wicker rocking chair, is Catherine. She is holding a silver brush. She runs it through her hair, which has grown back. It is short, snow-white, and soft as silk. She is wearing a floral dress, blue and yellow, that flows in the breeze. She is not Tommy anymore. The testosterone is leaving her system. Her voice is still deep, a permanent scar of her captivity, but her laugh is light and free. She looks at her reflection in a small hand mirror, not with fear, but with recognition. "Do you want more tea, Davy?" she asks, pouring from a porcelain pot. "Yes, please," I say. We watch the yard. Mark is down there throwing a tennis ball for a golden retriever named Buster. He looks happy. He looks lighter. He looks like my son. He waves at us and we wave back. Catherine reaches out and takes my hand. Her grip is strong. We don't need to speak. We survived the fire. We survived the lies. We won. It is getting dark now. Mark calls Buster inside the screen door, slamming with a sound that used to make me jump, but now just sounds like home. Catherine puts the silver hairbrush down on the wicker table. She looks at her hands, hands that were forced to do labor, hands that were restrained for decades, but now hands that are simply resting in the cool Florida breeze. She turns to me. "Davy," she says, her voice gaining a little more of that old, feminine softness, shedding the gravel of the basement. "Do you remember the locket? The real one?" I nod, a pang of guilt hitting me. "I never found it, Kat. I searched the evidence locker, but Thorne must have melted it down. I'm sorry." She smiles a genuine crinkling smile and reaches into the pocket of her floral dress. She pulls out something wrapped in a tissue. It isn't the silver locket. It is a small dried flower. A jasmine blossom she picked from the garden this morning. "I don't need the silver one," she whispers, placing the flower in my palm. "That locket was for the girl who died in 1981. I need new things for the woman who lived." That moment right there, that is the true victory. It isn't the lawsuit money, or the news interviews, or the applause. It is the ability to replace a metal chain with a flower. It is the ability to redefine value after having your identity stripped away. Mark walks up the porch steps, wiping sweat from his forehead. He sits on the railing looking at us. For the first time, I don't see the sheriff or the politician or the adopted son with a complex. I just see a man who chose his family over his ambition. He catches me looking and grins that boyish grin I thought I'd lost. "What are you thinking, old man?" Mark asks playfully. "I'm thinking I need a new belt," I joke, patting my waist where my favorite leather belt used to be. "I left the good one in a burning building." We laugh. It is a rusty, creaky sound, but it is real. And as the first stars appear over the Atlantic, I realize that this is what redemption sounds like. It doesn't sound like a choir. It sounds like three broken people laughing in the dark, refusing to be defined by the fire that tried to consume them. People say time heals all wounds. That is a mistake. Time just covers the wound with scar tissue. Time allows the infection to rot beneath the surface, festering in the dark. Truth is the only thing that heals. Truth is the scalpel that cuts out the poison and lets the light in. I am David Harrison, and I brought my sister back from the dead. Do not ever believe in unmarked graves, because sometimes the people we love aren't gone. They are just waiting for us to be brave enough to find them. If this story made you shiver, if it made you hug your loved ones a little tighter, please hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it is never too late to fight for the truth. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. I read every single one. Here is the lesson I want you to take away from my life. We often go through our days accepting the narratives we are told. We accept the official reports, the polite excuses, and the comfortable lies because it is easier than digging in the mud. But family is not about convenience. Love is not passive. True love is a relentless, violent act of refusal. It is the refusal to accept that someone is gone until you have turned over every stone. It is the refusal to let authority outweigh instinct. Do not let the world tell you who your family is, and do not let anyone tell you when to stop looking. Stay safe, stay curious, and never let the fire go out. Subscribe for more stories from the edge of reality.